Africans, we understand our terrain more. If people who are not from Africa come to Africa perhaps to do research, they may have the peripheral understanding of the underlying factors. But because we are in Africa, working in Africa, we seem to relate more with the situation on ground than people coming from outside Africa to carry out research. And we will be in a better position to tell the story.
If the rain can come anytime, but
my research is on climate and how that affects agricultural production essentially. We know that climate is changing, it's obvious, and that many agricultural activities will have to adjust to the changing climate, and that will affect what we now call climate smart agriculture. Climate smart agriculture because agriculture has to adapt to changing climate issues, and essentially that's what my research is on, modeling climate variables, rainfall distribution on various aspects of agriculture, livestock, crop production, fisheries, and forestry. Reduce the effect of shortage of rain on your farm.
Because the best is
the second project is a project that is based in Africa for African researchers. It's sponsored by DFID in collaboration with the Association of Commonwealth University and the African Academy of Sciences. It's a program that helps researchers in Africa to work in Africa. So I'm a research fellow from University of Ibadan, Nigeria, but I'm here in Ghana, carrying out my research in Kwame Nkrumah University as my base. And that opportunity wouldn't have been there if we didn't have SECO program. And I have other colleagues working from in other parts of Africa, East Africa, West Africa, South Africa. So it promotes South-South cooperation within Africa, unlike most postdoctoral programs that tends to take people out of Africa.
I'm in technology management, but with specialty in energy planning and system modeling. My research in SACO involves climate change, actually looking at low carbon development strategy in the power sector for West Africa to assess what level of emission there is and then what are the intervention steps that can be taken to reduce the emission over the coming years. The West African sub-region, looking at the indices of development, is one of the least developed energy consuming countries in the world. Going forward, everybody wants to develop. There's a need to increase the capacity for the electricity sector to support the economy in a sustainable manner. And based on that, I felt there will be the concern for global climate change. There would necessarily
in Sub-Saharan Africa post-harvest. It's about 40%, and theoretically, we could end hunger in Africa if we could figure out how to capture that and ensure that people have access to it. What do you see from your new vantage point on what's needed to get the kind of investment in the post-harvest infrastructure and to stop the losses of wet maize and in other areas?
Well, thank you, Josette. As you've said, this is an area in which I think if we don't all pay attention, then all the other developments that we're trying to do, be it in health, education, and elsewhere, will come to naught. So it's a critical area. And I do believe that even though many of the crises on food security and farming occur in Africa, that Africa is perfectly capable of feeding itself. But it needs a totally different approach in terms of strategy. And I think Many countries now are seeing that and are beginning to transform their agriculture. And the new approach that takes into account sustainability, employment, and other issues that wrap in is very welcome. I think before we used to focus so much on production, and to some extent we still do, but that's not the issue. I think the issue is how to transform the whole value chain of agriculture, taking it from research, where you have to look at the nature of the crops that are being grown and how to make them more hardy so that you don't lose so much in terms of the losses post-harvest, all the way up the value chain to production, to marketing, to the transportation and infrastructure for storage and for distribution. And I think that transforming our approach into this value chain will make a tremendous difference to dealing with the post-harvest losses. Very recently, a CEO of a major company visited my country, and he made a remark that he was traveling on the roads and didn't see one single cold storage truck on the road. And he said, now I can understand why you're experiencing some of the problems you are in terms of storage losses. And this illustrates why, in Nigeria in particular, we've taken a different approach.
I mean, Bill, multilateral lending institutions and multilateral governance institutions, they're skirting away from land grabbing, because land grabbing is a really, it's a huge problem. It's multifaceted, and people don't know how to combat it. What a lot of these organizations are preoccupied with is free trade. They want to see goods flow from border to border, uninterrupted, unhindered. And that's just not compatible with land grabbing. If you have these organizations promoting free trade and promoting, you know, the growing of monocrops, huge quantities of agricultural commodities to be exported around the globe with little barriers to trade, they're not concerned about peasant rights. It just doesn't fit into the equation for them. My name is Jennifer Natoli, and I'm here presenting at the G20 People's Summit. I'm talking about land grabbing, global inequality, and climate change. Land grabbing right now is forcefully expelling farmers off the land. Right now you have farmers being forcibly kicked off their land and forced into internally displaced people's camps. Not only are they losing the rights to their food-producing land, but they're also being placed in these camps where the living conditions are abhorrible, disease is rampant, there's no economic opportunity whatsoever. Whereas once farmers had the opportunity to be small-scale subsistence farmers and produce for themselves and take care of their family and possibly even have a little bit of excess food to take to market to sell, right now they're just completely reliant on food aid and handouts from the government. And the land that's being used is, or the land being grabbed is being used to cultivate agri-fuels and large-scale monocrops. So right now it's incredibly detrimental to the environment because we have loss of biodiversity happening. Food sovereignty runs counter to food security. It agrees with the fact that people deserve to have 3 meals a day, but it also incorporates the philosophy of culturally appropriate food. It says that people have the right to consume food that is culturally appropriate and, more importantly, grown within their own borders. Right now you have the majority of the food being consumed in the global south is produced in the global south. So food sovereignty says if we're growing the food for the world, we deserve to have that food for ourselves as well. And the surplus is then able to go to market, not just we're going to grow the food and you're going to take it all and we're going to perish.
Food sovereignty is the right of all peoples or communities to be able to have healthy, culturally appropriate food that was grown in an ecologically sound and sustainable manner, and the right of those peoples and communities to be able to determine what their food and agriculture systems should be like. So to be able to determine how and what is grown, whether they're growing it or whether they're working in partnership with other growers, to be able to determine how food can be processed, how it can be sold, who has the rights to do that. Communities being involved in that decision making is what makes it food sovereignty. I think when you talk about culturally appropriate, it's really about being able to respect that there are a wide variety of ways that human beings have dealt with food over hundreds of years in hundreds of places. And so being able to recognize that for different communities, ways of again, let's take food processing because it's such an issue. Ways of food processing may differ among those communities, and there's not necessarily a single right way to do that. And so being able to learn from and exchange cultural practices as opposing to privileging one single dominant culture and determining that all other cultures don't have a right to operate.
You have the right to produce your own food, to harvest it, and to eat yourself from that food, not depending on the organization of the corporation, depending on yourself and the work of the community. And it's an important cause because we want to defend the right of the people, the communities, to food themselves, to grow their own food, own seeds, and fight against transgenics, the corporation, and all the big companies who want to affect it.
My concern is that people should have food sovereignty, where they're able to control their production, they're able to control what they want to produce and what they want to eat, and not have it controlled by outsiders. So food sovereignty takes a political stand as against food security, which is just more or less an economic thing. And so we are talking about food sovereignty, where Ghana, for that matter, is able to produce its own food. We have control of our own seed. We have control over how we want to produce. We have control over what we want to produce, as against a situation where foreign countries might come to our aid, if I put it that way, by introducing technologies to either we may not even understand, by introducing inputs that we don't produce and we don't have control over. And in that case, if one day the external sources decide they don't give Ghana those inputs, it means we are not able to produce our own food. And that's why we think that food sovereignty is important for any nation to be able to control its own food production, and more important, the quality of the food, because food is also about your culture. And the kind of your food determines who you are. And so if an outsider is determining what kind of food you should eat, it means you are not able to define yourself.
Food sovereignty is a concept which is distinct from food security, because food security is talking about accessibility to food and availability of food. But at the countryside, where these people depend on tilling the land to get food, you cannot talk about accessibility when there is no availability. My name is Richard Mbunda. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Political Science, University of Dar es Salaam, and a PhD candidate. And my study is on peasant agriculture and food sovereignty in Tanzania. Well, I was born and raised in the countryside. It's called Mbinga, southern part of Tanzania. And there basically we cultivate coffee as a cash crop, but also food crops, mainly maize and beans. So I grew up tilling the land in order to earn a living. That's what my parents are doing. They earn their income from tilling the land. So when there's crop failure, they don't have income to access food from the other regions, or even if it is imported from outside the country. So that's why I thought we should talk about food sovereignty, because it talks about their right, to control the production process in terms of what is being produced, the quality and quantity. They say food shortages in Tanzania is largely a function of unsustainable peasant agriculture, which I think also is not true, because it is the peasants who have been feeding the country, and the government acknowledges that 95% of the food that is consumed domestically is produced by the peasants. We have close to
30 million hectares that can be used for, irrigation farming, and it's only 1% of that land is actually being, used for irrigation farming. So you can imagine nothing has been done to develop that land. If you look at